You Muslims who don't believe Jesus is God for a couple of reasons.
George Horne once said that, quote, "Pertinence and ignorance may ask a question in 3 lines, which it will cost learning and ingenuity 30 pages to answer. When this is done, the same question shall be triumphantly asked again in the next year, as if nothing had ever been written upon the subject," end quote. I think this quote is representative of engaging with Muslim apologists, as no matter how many times I or other Christians answer these types of objections to Jesus' divinity, the same question will just be asked again, as if it's never been answered. That said, let's get going. First is the objection that if Jesus is God, it makes no sense for us to say that he worshipped God. Couple of issues here. First, what does it mean to worship a figure? Well, roughly speaking, it is something along the lines of showing reverence and respect and adoration for a figure, or to prostrate yourself before them in a show of respect and reverence. If God is 3 persons and one of those persons becomes man, I don't see why we would expect that person to not revere and adore the other members of the Trinity all of a sudden, especially if we think that the incarnate person wants to set a moral example for the creatures around him. It's also worth noting that if Yahweh is called the God of all flesh, which he is in Jeremiah 32, and Jesus is now flesh, then it makes sense for Jesus to refer to the Father as his God. The Muslim objectors need to argue that if the incarnation happened, and if the Trinity is 2, we wouldn't expect to see Jesus performing these actions or using this language, but they haven't. These passages fit in perfectly with the doctrine of the incarnation and the Trinity. Second is the objection which Jesus was born, and that this supposedly is in conflict with God being eternal, and this objection shows that the Muslims don't even have the foggiest notion of what Christians believe. Christians don't think Jesus began to exist at the time of his birth. We believe he is an eternally existing person who chose to become a man and at that time was born from a woman. Jesus' birth does not entail the beginning of his existence, just the beginning of his time as a human. Third is the objection that Jesus ate and slept and so on, and again, this fails to understand the nature of the incarnation. Christians don't think God in his eternal divine nature needed to do these things, but rather when the Son chose to come down and live with us as a human, because he was now human, he needed to do these things in order to not die of malnutrition. Fourth is the quote where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I talked about this passage in depth in my last video, in one of my older videos titled 5 Reasons Muslim Rockstar is Bad at Exegesis. I suggest watching that. The last point I will address due to time constraints is the claim that Christianity teaches that Jesus said don't worship him. This is false. Jesus never said do not worship me, and in fact there are numerous passages showing that Jesus accepted worship from his followers, so our Muslim friends just need to get their facts straight here.